All right, hey everybody. Thanks so much for joining today. This is TAM Lab number 66, vSphere 7 with ADFS authentication. My name's Bill Hill, and I'll be running through this lab. Let's get going here. So a little bit about me. I'm coming to you from the great Pacific Northwest here in Portland. I've been with VMware for a little over 3 years now. I got a bunch of certs and things like that, support a bunch of customers, and done some stuff in IT. So we released vSphere 7 and I was reading the release notes and I had a, what kind of reaction? So reading through it, as of vSphere 7, we are deprecating the integrated Windows authentication option, right? It's essentially joining vCenter to the domain. And this kind of struck me, right? Like of all of the announcements and everything else, this kind of snuck under the radar. And it's something that I know our customers use quite a bit, right? In just trying to integrate with their Active Directory environment and things of that nature. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So what does that mean, right? Well, if we look at that knowledge base article, we get a little more information. AD will still be supported for authentication, but the recommendation is to use AD over LDAP or Identity Federation with ADFS. Now, as part of the release notes, we also saw that ADFS was going to be supported for authentication, but it wasn't really clear that the IWA is going away. So I thought this would be a really good session, right? Because this is something our customers are going to run into. On the flip side, using ADFS is actually pretty cool, right? Some of the integrations and the additional capabilities that you get from ADFS makes a lot of sense, and a ton of our customers use Office 365. And one of the best, or I should say more common implementations of Office 365 leverages ADFS for that authentication kind of function, right? So let's dig into what this looks like a little bit. So my lab, super simple today. We have a vCenter. We have ADFS server just running the ADFS role, and then we have a domain controller just running, domain services. It has an enterprise CA, and it's also running DNS. Right now, again, this is appropriate for our lab. You might find there's other architectures out there that our customers are using. Their ADFS might be set up a little different, but again, this is just a lab just to show how this might work itself out. So. With that, let's head over to the lab. All right, so what we have going on here, actually, I'll just, spoilers for later. So we have my vCenter environment. I'll go ahead and get logged in here. And I have this little notepad hanging out here on the side. We're gonna end up needing to pass a little bit of information back and forth between, what you see here on my desktop, as well as the ADFS server itself. So what I've done is logged into vSphere, and we go to menu administration, right? So administration, it takes us here, and I went down to single sign-on and configuration. And we're accustomed to coming in here and setting up our identity sources, right? Where here's your IWA, right? AD over LDAP, Open LDAP, whatever, right? So this is this is familiar for some of us. What's new is this over here, this link, change identity provider, right? And this little I that actually has a couple really useful pieces of information here, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and open that sucker up, and we get these redirect URIs, right? And this is important for ADFS. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy these, right? Let me just throw them over here. Perfect, okay. So, like a lot of things in our environments, right, we rely on certificates, and it's important to recognize that in this environment, I'm not using, a public CA, right? I'm not using VeriSign or anything else out there. I'm using my own internal CA, and vSphere doesn't know anything about it, right? And since ADFS leverages, HTTPS and things of that nature, we need to make sure that that our vSphere environment knows about the certificates that they could be running into, right? So since we're here, I'm going to go ahead and show you that I have uploaded a cert to the Trusted Root cert here, right? And so you can see it's my own CA and it's valid for, you know, a whole bunch of years. So that's positive. Now, the other thing we need to do as well is, let me swing this over here. That might be a horrible, well, we'll go with it. Is we also want to make sure we update the Java key store as well, right? And so documentation calls this out, but let's just run through it real quick here. So I have a little script on my other screen here. I'm just gonna copy and paste some commands over. So we're gonna go into a Java directory here where we have some binaries, including a utility called keytool. And this is what we use to kind of manipulate, to manipulate the certificate store here. Whoops, excuse me. So what I've done is I've taken a cert from the ADFS side, and I've put it in the root directory of the root user, again, on my VCSA appliance, right? And so if we were to walk through this, we can see we're going to use keytool to import a certificate, right? And it's going to be, it's going to go in this trust store, right? Here's the file, again, adfscert.crt. We're going to give it a name of ADFS, and here's the key store, right? So user Java JRE, you know, VMware, right? You can read it here. And so it's going to ask us for the password to the key store, and we get confirmation that it's there. But you know, there are some services within VCSA and vCenter that load this key store on like when the services start. So we need to restart a couple things. So let me grab those commands here. Oh, excuse me. Hello, copy. There we go. So we stop and start the vSphere UI. And then we also start the, there's a trust management and STSD service that we start here as well. So let's just wait a second. All right, we should be there. All right, perfect. So we got those stopped and started as appropriate. And the last thing I want to do is just kind of show you we can do a validate right here to view view the cert, right? So again, keytool. This time we're going to list, and I'm going to focus just on this one cert, right? Where we have the alias here is ADFS. We also have it here as ADFS. And so, you know, stuff popped up, right? You can see this is specific to me, you know, virtual bill from Portland, all of these things, right? And here's my CA that provided it. So this is something that the documentation will call out if you follow it. And it will disrupt the UI of vCenter. So, you know, just customers be aware that if you're doing this and other people are logged in, they may get kicked or at least see an error message. But that's all I wanted to do here, right? Just show you that we can upload the cert with the keytool, restart some services, and just show you that it's here. But at this point, we should be really good to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and here you go. We got booted. And if you wait long enough and you hit OK, it'll just let you right back in. Sound good so far? Any questions? I mean, it's pretty academic to this point. All right. We'll keep on moving.
Hey, Bill, there was one question in the chat.
Oh, perfect. What was that?
It says, hi, Bill. The KB also says that ESXi IWA is deprecated. How can customers log in with AD accounts to host in the future? So
this is one of the ways that you can do that, is leveraging ADFS to do it. The release notes and the KB article also comment that you can also use just AD over LDAP as well. So that'll be another option that you can use.
Yeah, I think, didn't you do a session on LDAP secure?
Yeah, exactly. So migrating from AD over LDAP to AD over LDAP S. So yeah, check that one out too. Cool, thank you. All right. So moving on, so now we have the certs in place. We can see that they're there. We went and grabbed these URLs, right? Or URIs, I should say, that we need for ADFS. So let's go get ADFS set up. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring up ADFS server here. Actually, copy these. and we'll go get ADFS up and running. So again, I'm here on my ADFS server. We have a blank notepad file for me, because again, we're gonna be bouncing some information back and forth. This is a server, I wanna say it's 2016. It could be actually, let's just double check here real quick, because it could be 2019. 1809, that's 20, oh, not 2019, there we go. Our documentation calls out a minimum of Windows Server 2016 running ADFS. They've made some changes between like 2012 R2 and 2016 that actually makes it easier for our integration. I actually tried, because of lab and going too quick, originally I did try on 2012 R2, which is something that I just have available to me, and come to find out it didn't work at all. So they were onto something when they made that recommendation. So at least, make sure your customers have ADFS up and running on server 2016 or above. What I'm going to go ahead and do right now is launch the ADFS console here. And this is a pretty straightforward, basic install. It asks for a couple certs and some pieces of information. Nothing too challenging there. We're going to create a new application group. And this is a new feature within ADFS, I guess when you compare it to previous versions on like 2012 R2, where it starts combining a couple of these previously like separated policies or provider trusts or whatever else, right? So it makes it really convenient for us to be doing this work. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new application group. And in here, we're going to call it, I don't know, TamLab vCenter ADFS. And in here, we get to pick some templates. We're going to go ahead and pick this one that says server application accessing a web API. So that's the one we're gonna roll with. And so we're going to use this client identifier. It's just one of the pieces of information that ADFS uses to make sure that it knows of vCenter and vCenter knows about it, right? So we're going to take that and copy that, right? So here's your client ID. Oops, excuse me, back to this. Oh, let's see here, here we go. All right, now we're going to take those URLs that we copied from the vCenter side, right? We click that little I, and we grab, sorry, URIs, I should say. And we're going to go ahead and paste these in here. So let's get this one in here, paste. And then one more. Copy and paste. Perfect. All right, next up, we're going to use some credentials, right? Again, we could use an AD account. It doesn't really make sense here. We can use a key here or just generate a shared cert. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And this is what our documentation calls out. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that to the clipboard. And we'll use that here in a little bit. Shared. There, we'll just do that. Cool. Shared secret. Okay. So next up here, now this seems a little weird. If you've never done ADFS, this will be a little funky, especially given like this example here, this identifier, right? And so this is going to be a string that gets passed from vCenter to ADFS, again, to help identify, to show that it is what it is. Again, this example here says it could be reporting itself as a web page. Well, our documentation directs us to use the this client ID. So this is a string that's going to be passed from our vCenter back to ADFS. And so we want to make sure this matches. I actually ran into an issue in troubleshooting setting this up where when I was doing a copy, I actually ended up having a little quote there at the end, apostrophe. And I didn't catch it because it's just so small and subtle. And the last character happened to kind of blur with it. And sure enough, it just was not working. It's because I made a mistake here. So we'll go ahead and add that and then move on. Here we're going to say access control. This is where some of the flexibility comes in. Our documentation says permit everyone. Okay, great. But what you can see here, and this becomes unsupported by VMware at this point, but there are options within ADFS to say, hey, I want multi-factor for a specific group, hey, that could be pretty cool, right? Again, your customer or you are going to have to evaluate how that works and whatever else. But it's possible to leverage the power of ADFS to give you some really cool functionality on authenticating people to vCenter, excuse me. For now, we're going to do permit everyone because we're following the documentation. And then the last little section in this wizard is we're going to have these scopes here where we're using OpenID, right, as a standard to help, for communication and passing claims back and forth and things of that nature. And then we're also going to use this all at claims here. So we have these two that we're going to go ahead and leverage for this. Let's go ahead and next and close. All right, we're getting there. I know it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but it's pretty cool when it ends up working. So I'm going to open this guy up, and you can see it's a little summary of what we have. We have a server set up here, and it's not very, not very fun. This is where you can go grab that client ID again if you need it. And we have our web API, and that we're going to do a little more configuration in here where we take some data from Active Directory, right, in the format from Active Directory, and we map it over to fields that OpenID is going to be able to, that standard is going to want to see. So we're going to come in here and create a couple claims. So we're going to be pulling data like LDAP attributes, right? And this is going to be our group claim, and we're going to say we're pulling this from Active Directory. And we get a whole bunch of LDAP attributes to pick from in here, right? And in this instance, we're going to be using the groups qualified by long domain. And how we're going to map it, all right? Well, we're going to map it to a thing called group, to a claim, or we'll say a claim called group. Perfect. Okay, we'll do this a couple more times. This time we're going to do one here where we pull our UPN, right, our user principal name, one of the two primary formats of like a username in Active Directory, the other one being the SAM account name. But here we're using the UPN, and we're going to map that to something called name ID. Oh, yep. Oh yeah, it'll tell you here too. You got to make sure that you select your attribute store. You get moving so quick, sometimes you forget about that. All right, and then the last one here, same thing, and this is going to be our UPN claim. UPN. So again, user principal name. And here, we'll go ahead and select UPN. And finish. Oh, hey, I did it again. Nobody stopped me. All right. So at this point, we have our three claims here, the group, subject, and UPN. Just because consistency, there we go. And so from the ADFS side, that's about it, which is not too bad. And if you have a customer that has a team that manages ADFS, this is probably something pretty academic for them, which is really nice. I guess the last thing we need to do is we need to grab the OpenID configuration. It's a URL that allows vCenter to get some information about ADFS. And so interestingly enough, this is something you get from PowerShell. And so there's a command here, a command like get ADFS endpoint, and we're going to grab a couple filters on there, if you will, to get this string. And what we care about here is the actual URI, none of the other garbage that comes along with it. Let's go ahead and throw that in our notepad, note file here, and we're good. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Everybody following along? Does this seem to be making sense?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, I got it. Yep. You're speaking for everybody. Love it. All right, so let's go back here.
There is a question. I don't know if we've gotten to that today.
What would that question be then? Let's see. Oh, excuse me. So in Trusted Roots, we import the CA cert, and in JKS, we import the ADFS cert. What is the key store password? Is it the default of change it? Yes, it is. It is the default of change it. I have not changed it myself. Documentation does call it out, and yeah, I guess I probably should have mentioned that. But yes, it is change it, all one word, lowercase, and that'll let you, update the key store. All right. Perfect. And then we have another question here in the chat, just saying, how would the configuration change with CAC and PIV cards? Why don't you watch and see what happens here? And I think it may, and I'm not trying to be like intentionally vague here. You'll see a major change to the UI here that'll probably answer that question. So let's go back over here. We have all of our information, right? And here, smart card, right, where we're talking, CAC. I'm gonna go ahead and finally click this link to change the identity provider. And now we have an option. So this is our toggle between what we're used to seeing, right? Our embedded stuff with, IWA, AD over LDAP, Open LDAP, things like that, or ADFS. It's a pretty abrupt change, right? It's either this or this, right? So I'm gonna select ADFS for this activity. And now this is where we start pulling in our client ID that we created earlier. I'm not about to remember what that is. Our shared secret, same thing. Copy. Paste. All right, and our OpenID address, it is here. It's also here because I've done it a bunch of times and it just doesn't really change. So at this point now, we've given vCenter a bunch of information by way of this OpenID config. It's an XML file that'll go grab, and it describes the ADFS service, right? We have this client identifier and this shared secret that ADFS will use to say, yes, you are authorized to be doing this kind of stuff. But what's really interesting and kind of threw me for a loop when I was running through this process here is it still uses an LDAP connection to do some of the lookups within Active Directory, right? So even though you're using ADFS for that authentication piece, verifying that the user is who they say they are, we're still leveraging LDAP to read into that directory. So I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of click through a bunch of these things because the autocomplete remembers what most of them are, right? And yeah, we're doing LDAP S. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab, it's that one. Next. And so again, we always review our work, right? In this instance, we do have the right client ID, shared secret. We have our OpenID address, and then we have a bunch of domain or LDAP attributes or lookups, right, for the LDAP S configuration, and we'll go ahead and hit finish. So back to the question about the CAC cards, that option is no longer here, right? By going to Microsoft ADFS, we don't have that option within vCenter. Now, if ADFS provides that type of service, then you'd look to leverage ADFS for that, right? Users would type in their user account or their username, and then ADFS would figure out how to verify who they are. And so that's kind of where we're at now, is we're gonna go ahead and do that. So let me bring over a browser that is not connected really anything. So here, actually, vCenter. All right, so we log in here. Now you can see the UI has changed, right? So we're accustomed to seeing username and password, right? And so in this instance, we're gonna do administrator vCenter.local. Okay, right? No redirection to ADFS because it's a local account. So on the local SSO domain, excuse me.
Hey, while you're waiting for that, we've got another question in chat.
Let's do it. Yeah.
How would the configuration change?
Oh, yep, already addressed that one.
Okay, did you? All right.
Yeah. Okay, so at this point then, we showed that we can log in, right? But one thing we didn't do is actually set up any kind of permissions, for users to log in. right? From the domain, from my domain. So I'm going to go ahead and come into administrators. This is an old relic. I'm going to do add members. And here now you can see I'm dropping down to ADFS, right? So I'm going to search my domain for Rainey Johnson. Okay, so she is going to be an administrator now. So if I hop over here and log out, let's see how this experience changes. All right, so again, we still have the same, or the new experience where there's no password. vb.info. Okay, so we see redirecting to our identity provider. Oh, it still saw me's logged in. Give me a second here, I apologize. I'm going to use this one. Give me 1 second here. Must have a cookie or something. Her session cached. Let's try that again. Okay, there we go. So what happened now is you can see that we're authenticating against adfs.vb.info, which is great, right? We're not hitting the SSO domain or anything like that, and it's been branded, right? So we know that we're in the place that we want to be. We can see it has a TAM Lab brand. We have the same little background we use for a bunch of our different TAM Lab assets, right? So we're in a good place here. So, okay. Let's go ahead and get logged in. Okay, so at this point, we can see here that Rainey Johnson is now logged in, and she'll have full admin rights, which is exactly what we were hoping for because it's part of the admin group. And that's the process. Now, if let's kind of roll back some of these changes that we made, and we can see how we can flip back and forth between the ADFS config and then the traditional. So if I go back, back to administration, I can kind of pull the rug out from us, right? So if I go back to single sign-on, configuration, we go back to change identity provider. So again, this is that toggle, ADFS or the traditional more embedded services, right? So I'll go ahead and hit embedded. And I understand, this is very heavy words. I understand the consequences and agree to continue configuring, right? What I've seen here, right, where it says changing the identity provider from ADFS to embedded will mean that users and groups will be removed. Kind of, and I'll show you why that's a little wrong, and you may have already seen that. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and check the box, right? And it's going to say, you either, now that you've done it, you need to go join the domain, which we know is deprecated, or use LDAP-S, right? So it's going to tell you what to do. So I'll go ahead and hit finish. And now you see we're back, right? We're back to having our traditional set of, here, add, right, where we can pick our regular stuff. And so the instructions say, all right, well, go ahead and replumb your vSphere environment up to Active Directory again as you had it before. Now, one interesting gotcha, right? We saw that alert that said that, accounts and groups may be removed. If I go back to our admin group, and this is something that that I didn't clean up prior to the lab, just to be honest, right, is this account is still tied to the admins, right? So it wasn't actually removed from this group. Had I added a user or a group from the domain, that would have been removed, but since I added a member to an existing group, that relic is still here. So this will be, one of the activities like, all right, well, we need to remove or something like that. But that's what the process looks like, right? So if I were to go ahead and log out, let's finish this up, log out. All right, now you can see we're back. Right, we're back to exactly where we started this whole thing with logging into vCenter. So I see a question in the Q&A here. It says, my customer has 32 domains. Come on. Will this ADFS config support multiple domains? AD over LDAP requires all 32 domains to be added manually, and we're using IWA today because we don't want to manage this. And I can't blame you. And your customer will probably not like the idea of maybe needing to move to ADFS, at least on the surface. So let's hop back over to ADFS. And I'm by no means an ADFS expert, right? You have this claims provider, and you can see actually I was monkeying around with getting Workspace ONE to work in here, and I got it most of the way there, which is kind of cool. But it defaults to Active Directory, right? And so I'm not sure, I'm assuming there's not really a trust set up between those different domains. That's just an assumption here. It's possible that they could come into ADFS and set up multiple data sources, right? Where you're actually reaching out to multiple Active Directory domains or things like that. So there are ways that it might be doable, but that's kind of an architectural, thing beyond what my skill set is, my knowledge level. So it's possible.
On the flip side of that, one thing that they might be able to investigate would be to establish a resource domain. I did AD work before.
Oh, awesome.
To VMware. So if you establish a resource domain, that could be your single domain or point of contact, and then basically all your resources would get allocated and managed out of that resource domain.
Oh, that's good to know. And the other consideration too is now, I know not everybody falls under this bucket here, but a ton of customers have Office 365. And if your customer does have that and they have a strategy for authenticating users to Office 365 with Active Directory like ADFS, they could leverage a very similar, even possibly that same ADFS infrastructure, and use a lot of that logic that's already in place for how do I reach out to this user on this domain, this user in this domain. So if that's the case, they do have Office 365. A lot of the work could already be done for them. All right, cool. Excuse me. So a couple other things I want to point out since we have time, and it's always useful, is troubleshooting this thing, right? So it's been a little while since I spent time in ADFS. It's not a natural place for me to be, as a TAM working on our vSphere or VMware products, right? So I got caught up by a bunch of little annoying things. So when you're looking at ADFS, right, let's spend a second here and look at the event viewer. Right, so if we look at application, ADFS, and admin, this log is really, really useful. And I'm going to let's see, that's 1020. So I'm going to scroll down and find a bunch of red. There we go. So it's event ID 364 and event ID 1020, right? Really, really useful. Because what this shows us is, and this is how I found that I was using the wrong relying party, right? It showed that I was passing the wrong string here, right? So you can see what the relying party is, but also what they're passing for that party itself, right? So it's a good troubleshooting point to show some of the data that's coming back and forth. So I use this one a lot until I finally figure out that I had the wrong character in there. So that's a really good log. And then if we head back over to the VCSA, we'll just start here at the top. Under var log VMware, oh my gosh, it's like I can't type. There we go. We have a number of logs in here. Messages ends up being a really, really good log, right? So tailed the messages log file itself, and sometimes what I end up doing, this is a quiet vCenter, obviously, right? Put in some spaces or put in some interesting characters, just kind of delineate what's going on, but then try an authentication, right? And then you'll start seeing where the logs are breaking, or the process is breaking, and it actually ends up being really, really useful. In this instance, when I stumbled across this, I found that I was actually using the wrong SSL cert. So by by seeing that message, right, unable to authenticate or something along those lines, I found, oh, it's just SSO, right? The other log that's really useful is if we go one level deeper into the SSO folder, we have a bunch of logs in here, and the SSO admin server log is a really good one too. That's a really long one. I'm not going to count that. And this is also a really good log for like the LDAP-S stuff. Not very exciting, it's showing a cert here. But again, as you go through SSO activities of adding LDAP configurations and whatnot, you'll see that show up here. And you can use that to help troubleshoot whether or not it's able to see, oh, we got something here.
Hey, we've got another question in the chat.
Yeah, okay. So we see, sorry, I have to come back to the ESXi CLI access with AD users. I've never seen LDAP auth used for that. Also haven't found options to add ADFS directly to the hosts. As far as I know, ADFS is supported through vCenter, not the host directly. So I'm not entirely sure how that would work. I mean, I guess, you know, we could fumble our way through it. And same with the ESXi CLI for AD users itself. And that's just something I'm not familiar with. If anybody on the session here knows anything about authenticating users at the CLI, please chime in. I'd love to get your feedback.
Yeah, I mean, just we deprecated IWA authentication for the hosts themselves, and it seems that we don't have an answer to that. We'll see. Yeah.
That's a really good point. And I don't have an answer either, apparently.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay.
Love it. All right. Cool. What else? Anything? Oh, I guess there's one other interesting troubleshooting thing too, and this could be end up being really useful. Is I'm just pulling it up here. There we go. Sometimes it's hard to know if ADF is even working, right? If this is something that you've never set up before, a customer's never set up before, you know, we want to validate even the most basic steps, right? If ADFS is fundamentally broken, then obviously everything else downstream is not going to work. So there is, let's kill this. There is a URL you can use against ADFS. And let me kill that, just make sure there's not a weird funky session being maintained. Here we go. So it's this, you know, ADFS server / ADFS ls IDP initiated sign-on. On ADFS after, so like 2016 and above, this feature is not enabled by default. There's a PowerShell command to run that will actually enable this UI. Otherwise, you'll get like a resource not found error or things of that nature. But at this point, what this is going to do is just literally allow me to provide credentials and then validate that those credentials actually work. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and, you know, it says I'm not signed in. Okay, great. So go ahead and hit sign in. Takes us to that same UI that we saw before. And if I type everything correctly, you are signed in. Like, that's the most anticlimactic but exciting thing if you're trying to get this thing stood up, right? So it shows that my credentials were successfully challenged and validated with the domain, and you know, ADFS at that point, that level of plumbing and setup is good to go. So I'll go ahead and sign out, and we're back to there. So that's another really useful troubleshooting tool, is even just validating that ADFS itself works. All right, cool. Anything else? Any questions, comments, thoughts? We still have a couple minutes left, so more than happy to hang out and chat about it. Okay, well, leave it at that. You know, this is a vSphere 7 function or feature, right? And we know that a lot of customers, unless they're chomping at the bit, are going to stay potentially on 6.7 for a while. For example, we have that support extended. But this could be a really interesting feature for our customers. You know, what we see now is ADFS is the supported identity provider, right? And, you know, it's potentially only a matter of time until maybe there's another option or additional features that are added or supported. So it's great to have this anchor for what a future security model looks like. So I'm super excited about it. I don't know that we're gonna have a ton of people rushing to it, but it's a pretty straightforward setup. So I felt pretty happy about that. If they already have ADFS, a lot of the work is already done for them, right? So all in all, pretty cool. Happy to see it. And we'll just have to guide our customers through, whatever the next security model journey is for them. So with that, I'll go ahead and end the session. So everybody, thank you for joining, and have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thanks, Bill.